In late December of 2000, in a quiet part of Tokyo, lies a residential neighborhood in Setagaya Ward. The streets were narrow and the houses sat close together. Life seemed to move at a slow and gentle pace. Most of the houses looked about the same, modest two-story homes filled with families. But on December 30th, for one family, that quiet wouldn't be from peace. It would be one of eerie horror, and the person responsible would baffle police with their every action. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the eerie. I'm Drew, and today's episode is one that will leave more questions with every step of the way. But before we get into the episode, a quick note that while we try to stick to the fact, sometimes accounts differ and details get lost or skewed over time. Also, any names will likely be mispronounced, so just take it as entertainment. On December 30th of the year 2000, the year was almost over, and for much of the world, the celebrations were about to start. And Japan was no exception, although for them the new year was not just an excuse to get drunk, shoot fireworks, and make resolutions that would last a day and a half. For them, the new year was sacred. It was a time to welcome good fortune and begin anew. And a lot of this involved deep cleaning, preparing special dishes to eat, listening to 108 temple bells ring, among many other things. The residents of Setagaya Ward were doing just that. And this isn't the kind of place where violent crime happens. It's a dense, cozy residential district. Neighbors all know each other, and their children walk to school together. It's a place that has its own rhythm and routine, and the community was kind of built on that predictability. And the Miyazawa family fit right in. They were like the perfect image of this area. Family of four, middle class, sensible and reserved, but not isolated. The father worked hard and pretty well kept to himself, but he was still friendly and warm. The mother was attentive, organized, caring, and deeply devoted to her husband and children. And the kids were young and energetic, still living in a home meant safety, and their carefully arranged two-story home reflected that. It had its living space downstairs, bedrooms were tucked away on the second story, and it was full of bits of artwork, pictures, and decor that reflected their unique personalities. In Japan, preparations for the new year usually started taking place between the 28th and 30th. And for this family, December 30th started out the way it always does. The day kind of felt slightly suspended in time, caught between the old year and the new, with nothing but hope and possibilities ahead, and reflections on the past running through their minds as they finished up getting ready for the new year. As the day ticks on, shops close a little earlier than usual, streets thin out as families head home, and the city begins to slow to a crawl. At the Miyazawa house, the shoes are sat next to the door, bags are put down, and lights come on room by room as the evening settles in. The house is filled with the soft clatter of dishes, footsteps moving between rooms, children's voices with brief bursts of energy and then calm again. Nothing about the evening feels unusual. But at some point in the night, someone else is already nearby, close enough to see the house and know when the lights turn on, even close enough to understand the rhythm of the evening. Because on the morning of December 31st, the grandmother would find the whole family had been killed. On that morning, police arrived at the scene quickly, and they get to work examining everything, and investigators would later try to reconstruct a timeline. They looked at what was left behind, food that had been prepared, items placed where they would normally go, and signs that the family was settling in for the night, not rushing or afraid. And when the intruder enters, now or whether they had already been inside for some time, is uncertain. But at some point during the night, the stillness inside the Miyazawa home, it changes. It's subtle. There's no crash or sudden noise that announces disaster. But someone wakes up, and whether they sense danger or simply hear something unfamiliar, we don't really know, but we do know that this is where the sequence begins. And so investigators would later piece together the order of events by following the house itself, room by room, stair by stair. And the following is what they believe took place. The father, Mikio Miyazawa, hears a subtle noise, and he goes downstairs to investigate. He briefly looks around, not really concerned, more curious as to what he's heard, like what could it have been. And he doesn't see anything, so he starts to turn around to go back upstairs, but as he does, a shadow comes flying toward him, and he can see it out of the corner of his eye, but he doesn't have any time to react before the intruder is right on top of him, stabbing him. And once he's dead, the killer eased Mikio to the floor, and he looks up the staircase intently, watching and listening to be sure no one heard the struggle. And once the killer was confident that no one else had woken up, they eased their way up the stairs. He slowly opens the door to Mikio and Yasuko's bedroom, and as they entered, Yasuko wakes up and looks over. For a moment, she's thinking it's her husband coming back to bed, but in a flash, the killer's already at the bedside with their knife plunging into Yasuko. She fights back, and she fights back hard, but it's too late. The killer is fast and brutal. Within moments, Yasuko would stop moving. And if this wasn't evil enough, the killer then went and did the same to the two children. Any sense of safety that once lived in the walls of that house is stripped away, piece by piece. The sounds never rise high enough to escape the home. Neighbors sleep on, separated from violence by only a few feet and a wall of thin air. After the violent attack ends, the Miyazawa home doesn't erupt into chaos. It doesn't fill with noise. It just stops. The rooms stay frozen in time for the most part. Furniture doesn't really move. The lights stay as they are. From the outside, the house looks no different than it did hours earlier. It just looked like a quiet family home waiting for morning. But inside, the person responsible for murdering an entire family just makes themselves at home. Instead of running away, they begin to live inside the space. They tend to their own injuries, wrapping wounds, stopping blood, leaving behind signs of care and deliberation. And they move through the kitchen, rummage around the refrigerator. They help themselves to food that the family had prepared for New Year's. And they sit and relax for a while, and then walk around room to room. At some point, they use the bathroom. Outside, the neighborhood remains quiet and unaware. What's most disturbing is not just that the killer stays, but that they stay comfortably, as if the house belongs to them now, as if the people who live there have already faded into the background. Hour by hour, the darkness thins. The night begins to loosen its grip and give way to morning, and still, no one leaves. And when the killer finally does leave the Miyazawa home, they do so without anyone seeing them. And by the time anyone realizes something is wrong, they had already gone. Morning arrives quickly in Setagaya Ward. Another winter day begins the way thousands have before it. Neighbors step outside to start their routines. Doors open and close. A few kids hop on their bikes. Curtains open wide in the windows. But one house doesn't respond to the morning. The Miyazawa home stays dark. At first, it really didn't seem like that big of a deal. Families oversleep, plans change, people are busy preparing for the new year. But as the hours pass, concern grows and phone calls go unanswered. Eventually, Yasuko's mother decides to check on them in person. And when she gets to the house, things already feel off. The shades are still pulled and everything is just too quiet. She gets to the door and steps inside, and immediately it's clear this isn't a home anymore. This is a crime scene. Police arrive expecting some tragic but contained event, a domestic incident, a burglary gone wrong maybe. They expected something terrible but familiar. Instead, they find something that stops them cold. They find that the entire family had been killed. As the officers moved through the house, details began to surface that made no sense. There's food left out, dishes used after the estimated time of death, bathroom that shows signs of recent use. Investigators began to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't a hit-and-run murder or something that happened in a moment of rage. It was drawn out, intentional, personal in a way that no one can yet explain. By midday, the neighborhood is sealed off and police tape lines the streets. Officers come and go inside the house, and time seems frozen, like it's trapped in the moment where normal life ended. Word begins to spread in hushed conversations between neighbors who suddenly realize how thin the walls between safety and danger really are. 4 people are dead, and the killer left behind more than anyone could have imagined, yet somehow they slipped away without a single person noticing. As investigators begin documenting the scene, a disturbing pattern emerges. Not only did the killer stay for hours after the murder, they were so completely unconcerned with the evidence they left behind. At first, it's subtle. Food has been taken from the refrigerator, prepared, and consumed. They used plates, opened and discarded wrappers, used the victim's toilet, left their own blood in the sink, and the rest of the house, for that matter. They even left behind their own jacket and shoes, or at least a jacket and shoes that didn't belong to this family. Investigators began to ask questions that felt almost absurd, like why stay? Why risk being caught at dawn? And most unsettling of all, what kind of person can sit, eat, and tend to their wounds in a home filled with death? By the time police fully understand what they're dealing with, the scope of this case has changed. This is no longer a murder investigation, it's a psychological puzzle. From a forensic standpoint, the Miyazawa home should have been a dream. Blood was everywhere, not just in one room, it was throughout the house. The killer left behind blood, skin cells, clothing, saliva. It wasn't a partial profile that they had left behind. This was a full genetic blueprint. And in 2000, this was as close to certainty as an investigation could get. Detectives believed they weren't asking if the killer would be identified. This was just a matter of when it was going to happen. If the biological matter wasn't enough, the personal items left behind helped to paint an even clearer picture. The jacket and shoes were not generic. They were expensive, and they had been worn, lived in, and broken in over time. The fibers told stories. Manufacturing tags suggested origin. The shoes were traced to a limited production run. They were sold in only a few regions. The jacket appeared to be from outside of Japan, and everything about the evidence screamed traceable. Investigators began building a profile. They determined that the killer was a young male adult, likely physically fit and injured during the attack. The DNA suggested mixed ancestry, which was not common in Japan. That narrowed the field down further. This was a person who should exist in records somewhere. Police ran the DNA through national database, but to everyone's surprise, there was no match. So they ran it again, but they got the same results. Nothing. They expanded the search internationally, enlisting the help of Interpol and accessing foreign databases. And the search went on for weeks, then months, then years without a hit. The evidence was there and the science was solid. The systems had worked exactly as designed, which meant the unthinkable possibility that had to be considered. The person who committed this crime was not in any database, meaning they had no criminal history and no recorded identity tied to their DNA. For the purpose of this investigation, they were basically chasing a ghost. Investigators began to understand that this case wasn't going to be solved by brute force of technology alone. Despite all the evidence, despite the blood, the clothing, fingerprints, the killer had slipped through every net. And with each passing year, the question grew heavier. How does someone leave behind this much of themselves and still vanish completely? Detectives begin doing what they always do when the evidence isn't enough. They start asking why. Why this family? Why this house? And why that night? The first theory is the simplest, that this was just a random intruder, burglary that spiraled out of control. But nothing of value was taken, and the violence seemed way too personal for this to be just someone looking for quick money. So investigators moved on. They think maybe this was a targeted attack. But the Miyazawas had no known enemies, no criminal ties, and they didn't have debts or serious disputes. And everyone investigators talk to tells the same story, that this was just a normal, quiet family. Then comes the theory that unsettled people the most, that this was just the work of someone who didn't plan at all, that somebody just snapped and this family happened to be the ones who suffered for it. But even that explanation struggles to hold, because nothing about the aftermath really suggests chaos. The killer treated their wounds, changed clothes, had a meal, and just seemed pretty calculated. Some investigators wonder if the killer had been inside the house before, studying it. The way they moved suggested familiarity, but no evidence ever confirmed prior contact. And there were no signs of stalking or reports of suspicious behavior. The family wasn't afraid someone was going to hurt them. So another theory emerges. What if the killer wasn't local at all? The DNA points to mixed ancestry, and the clothing appears foreign. The lack of database matches suggest someone outside of Japan's systems entirely, possibly a visitor who left the country soon after. But if that's true, then once again, why this family? Why stay inside the house for hours and leave behind evidence that could identify you forever? Every theory explains some part of the crime, but never all of it. And that's the problem. The case resists simplicity. Each explanation bends under the weight of details until it breaks. As years pass, public interest grows, but clarity does not. The evidence remains. The DNA remains, but so does the silence. And somewhere out there, the person who did this continues to live their life, untouched by the crime scene they left behind. As the years pass, the Miyazawa case does not fade. It becomes part of the background noise of Japanese criminal history, a case everyone knows but no one understands. The evidence is preserved meticulously. The DNA profile is kept on file. The clothing remains cataloged. The house itself becomes a symbol, spoken about in lowered voices. Every advancement in forensic science brings the same question back to the surface. Will this be the breakthrough? New DNA techniques are tested and international databases expand. Cold case teams revisit the file again and again. But each time the answer is the same. No match. The killer remains unidentified. But the hope remains that one day there will be justice for the Miyazawa family. That's it for today's story. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Until next time, keep watch and stay alert. See you next time on Legends May Live.